Ready? All right, if you would turn to 1 Samuel chapter 3. We'll continue on in our study about the man Samuel. He's actually a boy at this time in our story. We'll get through chapter 3 tonight. I had thought about stopping there, but I think we need to go on through the next two chapters for sure. The next chapter, chapter 4, is where we see the death of the sons of Eli and Eli himself, the high priest, and his two sons who were priests. That his two sons, if you remember, we talked about in the last chapter, in chapter 2, that they had caused a lot of problems in Israel and were doing a lot of wicked things. And the Lord had told Eli that there would not be another priest come out of his line, out of his family, and that the Lord was going to cut off his house from the priesthood. And so the Lord does that in chapter 4, and we'll get to that next time. Tonight in chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a more familiar story to us. It's another one that we've been through several stories recently in our studies that were stories that we learned as a child. They're popular stories with children. This one about Samuel is this is the one that we commonly hear told to children, or we may have heard ourselves and growing up in Sunday school or even in church. So we'll read through it and see what the Lord has for us. In chapter 3, verse 1, and the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. So again, this word ministered, remember Samuel's mother, Hannah, had promised her son to the Lord, to the work of the Lord, and to minister unto the Lord, basically meaning that he was to work for the Lord. And it says, and the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. So he's not preaching. Samuel did, as when we studied about King Saul, we saw where Samuel did perform some priestly duties. He did offer sacrifices and things of that nature. He was not the high priest. He was a judge, and he was a prophet. And we'll see that later in this story where the people of Israel recognize him as he gets older and is grown. The people recognize him as a prophet from the Lord for Israel. Now, he's under training by Eli. He's living at the tabernacle with Eli, and being taught by Eli, taught the ways of the Lord. And the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. In other words, the word of the Lord coming to his people and speaking to them was rare, is what it means there. It was precious. In other words, if the Lord did come, it was something they cherished. But it didn't come very often. And at this point, it says there was no open vision. In other words, there was no vision for the nation. The Lord hadn't revealed to Eli, the high priest, what was to be in their near future, what they were supposed to be doing as a nation. Other than worshiping the Lord, that's all they knew. And it came to pass at that time, when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. So Eli is an old man by this time. He tells us later, we'll see this later, how old he was. But at this point, we just know that he's an old man. He's laid down to rest, and he's at that age where his eyes are beginning to fail him. Can't see good anymore. And there the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep. Now that was something in the law that they were commanded to do, was to keep the lamp burning at all times, where the ark of the covenant was. that was the high priest's job, or in this case, he probably would have had Samuel doing that for him since he could not see good. But the light has gone out, and Eli doesn't recognize it, doesn't realize it. He and Samuel both have laid down to sleep for the night. It says that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, "Here am I." He ran unto Eli and said, "Here am I, for thou callest me." And he said, "I called not. Lie down again." And he went and lay down. So the Lord is called out. And remember, back in verse 1, Samuel is still just a child here. Doesn't tell us exactly how old he was. I can remember in different Sunday school literatures that I've seen over the years, they have him anywhere from being 4 or 5 years old all the way up to a teenager. You know, nobody knows how old Samuel was at this point. After this telling of this story, we see Samuel jumps to being a young man in the next, I believe it's the next chapter. So really, there's a span of years there that gets skipped, it appears, and so we have no idea how old he was, and there's no way really to figure it out. So don't worry about it. You know, that's the way I look at it. The Lord doesn't tell us. But he hears someone call his name. He doesn't recognize it as the Lord. The Lord's never spoke to him before. He just knows a man's voice. He's heard a man's voice, and he assumes it was Eli. And Eli says, "It's not me. I didn't call you. I was sleeping." And the Lord called yet again, "Samuel." And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here am I, for thou didst call me." And he answered, "I called not, my son. Lie down again." By this time, you can imagine Eli's probably getting a little perturbed. He's an old man. He's wanting to get his rest. And here's this boy that keeps coming in and said, "Hey, well," obviously this boy's hearing things. Eli hasn't caught on yet to what it is, but he does soon. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time, and he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here am I, for thou didst call me." And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. So Eli knows the Lord is speaking to this child. Eli already knows this is a special child anyway. You remember the whole circumstances around his birth. It was a miraculous birth. His mother was barren at the time. She had other children later after him, but at the time that he was born, at the time he was conceived, she was barren, and it was because of the Lord. And she had gone and prayed at the tabernacle and had told the Lord that if he gave her a son, that she would dedicate him to the work, to the Lord's work. And that's what she does. Now, therefore Eli said unto Samuel, "Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." So Samuel went and lay down in his place, and the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel answered, "Speak, for thy servant heareth." And the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of every one that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli, that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever." So basically, this is the same thing that we saw the Lord tell Eli in the last chapter, that because of the wickedness of your sons, remember they were priests in the temple under their father. He was the high priest, and he didn't do anything about it. He didn't chastise them. He didn't punish them for what they were doing to the people of Israel, the wickedness that they did. And so Eli is, not only is he going to lose his sons, he's going to die himself because of all this. And so now Samuel knows. That's a lot to put on a young boy, isn't it? But because you notice he's been raised by an older man, quite a bit older man. So he's probably, I would guess, and in most cases, you take a child that's raised like that, they usually turn out to be a little more mature than other children their age. It doesn't tell us. We don't know if he had any contact with other children or not. We know his mother came and visited at least once a year, and so I don't know if his siblings came and he got to visit with them. We don't know if there were other children that he played with. Doesn't tell us any of that. We do know that Eli raised him, and Eli would have been a very serious teacher at his age, and knowing that what God had already promised him, that his bloodline was going to end. Eli would have been relying heavily on this boy Samuel, for these types of things. And of course, Samuel, it appears as though Samuel is not of the priesthood. He's not going to, at least he's not going to be the high priest anyway. He's not in that lineage, the lineage of Aaron. But he, again, like I said, he does perform some priestly duties later. Now, verse 15, and Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. Samuel doesn't know if Eli knows about this or not, but he does. And actually, I guess the Lord did tell Samuel that he had told Eli that, but it's a very serious matter. He didn't want to talk to him about it, out of respect for the man, if nothing else. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son, and he answered, Here am I. And he said, What is the thing that the Lord hath said unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee. So he kind of threatens the boy here. But remember, he's the high priest. He's got a right to know what the Lord told this boy, because it concerns spiritual matters of the nation. And Eli, being the high priest, is in charge of the spiritual matters of the nation. Samuel told him every whit, and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seemeth him good. Eli says, after Samuel tells him everything, he tells him, it's the Lord. I know it. Only the Lord would know what you told me. And he says, let him do what seemeth him good. In other words, it's the Lord's will. Whatever the Lord's will is, let it be. And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. So now we see a transformation here, at least temporarily anyway. The Lord is going to be working through Samuel instead of Eli. Remember, he had been working through Eli in the past because he was the high priest. Now he's going to work through Samuel, who's his prophet. Now, at some point, we know there is another high priest after Eli is dead, but that doesn't happen until he dies. High priest didn't retire. That wasn't in the plan. That wasn't in the law. There was no law saying that they had to retire. If they got ill to where they were bedridden and couldn't perform their duties, if they were, for whatever reason, if they lost their mind, I guess, those would be exceptions, of course. But as long as they were able to carry out their priestly duties, they were priest for life. So, unless, like in this case, well, even in this case, the Lord eventually kills Eli because of what he's done and what his sons have done. And so that's the Lord's way of dealing with a high priest. How would you like to have been Eli, knowing what his sons have done and what the Lord has promised him? How would you like to be Eli and have to go into the Holy of Holies every year for the yearly sacrifice? Remember what the promise was there? If they tied a rope around their ankle, and if for some reason they did something they weren't supposed to do, the Lord, if he chose to, could kill them while they were in there. They were supposed to go in there with a clear mind and a righteous heart and all that. They were to be as perfect as possible as a man could be before they were to go into the Holy of Holies. They were to go through all the cleansing rituals that they had to do. But here Eli had his two sons who had done wickedly, and he knew about it, and he refused to do anything about it. And eventually the Lord takes him home because of it. So we'll stop there tonight. We'll get into all that next time. We start seeing more of the Philistines and their dealings with Israel. And when we get to chapter 5, we'll see another popular story where the Ark of the Covenant is taken to the Philistines' temple, their Dagon temple, and we'll get into that when we get to it. So we'll stop there. There's not going to be very many more, because it won't be many more chapters, and we'll be into starting the story of Saul, and we're going to stop before we get there. But I just want to look at the life of Samuel and see what a godly man he was, and how the people respected him because of that.